Welcome to yet another video in our series, St. John the Divine's Financial Situation, Serious but Not Fatal. This series of videos is being put together because we think it would be a really good idea to introduce all members of the congregation to our financial systems, to provide information about our current financial situation, and to ensure that everyone feels confident participating in discussions about future plans for the church, with a really rich sense of what the financial situation is and how certain decisions going forward might impact that situation. As we've said in videos number 1, which was focused on the current financial situation, and video number 2 focused on current St. John the Divine expenses, there are 4 short videos that make up the heart of this series. There will also be a bonus video, which will be longer and really go into a deep dive of details for people who want lots and lots of information about how the budgeting system currently works. This particular video is the third, video number 3, and it's going to focus on St. John the Divine sources of income. I'm here today with David Buckman, our terrific treasurer. And David, so since today we're talking about St. John the Divine and sources of income, what are some of our current sources of income?
Well, thank you, Erin. We have a couple of categories or sources of income, one of which we, in the earlier videos have talked about as our operating income or operating revenue. And then we have another category called non-operating revenue. And we need to just explore that, that distinction. But I want to focus first of all on operating revenue, which we've talked about in earlier videos.
Great.
I'm just going to put a little chart up again that you will have seen before, but it's one that is helpful.
Okay, I see that this is a chart that says operating revenue in thousands per year.
That's correct. And as you can see, we only have 2 major sources of operating income. The first one and the main one is the one in dark blue, which is what we've called givings, which average about 75% over the 5-year period, 2018 to 2022. And this chart, by the way, just to refresh your memory, is 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 2022. And up on the side here, we have the scale, which goes up to about 500, well, 600,000, thousands, not $600, luckily. So as you can see, our operating revenue in total has never been more than $500,000 over the last 5 years and has started a bit of a downward trend. We'll see how 2022 does. Okay, rentals are 24% of the remaining 25% because during COVID, fundraising stopped. So that's, I just wanted to recap. So I'm going to put up a second chart.
And so what I see in this chart that I haven't seen before is a breakdown of total givings. And so the givings, as you just said, are basically what people are contributing as operating income, which is then meant to cover operating costs. And what exactly are these givings comprised of?
That's, of course, what that chart is going to show. There's been some interesting changes over the years. The largest in total, on average, is actually pre-authorized direct debit, which is this dark blue one at the bottom here. That is where you sign a form and each month your bank account is debited by the amount that you are giving. So there's nothing more you have to do. It doesn't cost anything, and it's a very efficient way of doing it. Now, I just want to comment on if I jump to the gray one, which is the Sunday envelopes. Back in 2018, this pre-authorized direct debit had not really come to fruition yet. And so that started in 2019. And as you can see, it's had a dramatic impact on Sunday envelopes, which are now a relatively small part of our givings. I'd like to talk a little bit about just 2022 because of this big change that happened earlier. Majority of our total givings, which were about $302,000, came, or 58% came from this pre-authorized debit. The
Mhm.
further 18% comes from pre-authorized credit cards, and Sunday envelopes are now contributing just 15%. The remaining 9% comes from things like share donations, Canada Helps, and so on.
Mhm. Okay. And so I know that as a member of the congregation, that when I get asked what I'm thinking about in terms of planning a contribution for the year, that I get to choose some of these options. This sounds really familiar to me. Like, do you want to do this through pre-authorized direct debit? Do you want to give us a credit card number? Do you want us to give you Sunday envelopes? Does it matter which of those I choose?
Yes, it does. The main thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, pre-authorized debit doesn't cost us anything. Of
Hmm.
course, if you just put a check or cash in an envelope, it doesn't cost us anything either. However, all credit card payments do charge a, are charged a fee.
Oh.
It's about 2.5 to 3% for credit cards. Also, by the way, in Canada Helps, we have to pay about 3.5 to 4%, and for that extra 1%, they send you a tax receipt. We don't have to do that. That's the main difference. But people can give it any way that works for them. However, you may have noticed in the news recently that any credit card use may be attracting a 2 to 2.5% surcharge, even if you pay your utility bills, for example. So the church, I think, is going to have to look at seeing whether we need to have to do something like that.
Well, if nothing else, it's probably really good for people to know that, just to make the numbers round, if somebody's giving $100 a month in direct debit or by writing a check, they really are giving $100 a month. But if they're doing $100 a month through a pre-authorized credit card, they're really only giving like $97. So
Correct.
that's really good information, I think, for people to have.
Good.
That is you showing me the operating fund, but operating fund section that's called givings doesn't include everything that people donate, right? It doesn't mean that every single time people give any kind of donation that is operating fund givings.
Correct. Yeah.
Mm.
For example, using last year, 2021, a further 66,791, or an extra 22%, was given for outreach, such as what people put in their blue envelopes and gave directly to the food bank and so on. Of course, both givings and outreach get tax receipts because they're charitable donations.
So basically, for individual people's purposes, a donation may seem like a donation, may seem like a donation, and all of them get tax receipts. But a donation that goes into a Sunday envelope, or that's a pre-authorized donation, is money that can help to cover the operating expenses of keeping the lights on and keeping the clergy paid. Whereas blue envelope donations and some other kinds of donations, that's a completely separate account. And so that money is kept separate. So if we're really trying to talk about covering, making the deficit smaller, covering the operating expenses, we really need to focus on making sure that there's donations going into that operating givings.
Correct.
Great, great. So the rest of our operating income, where does that come from? I remember you saying rentals. Can you explain that to me a little bit?
Yeah, the chart has come up on that. And again, the 5 years on the scale, it's roughly 100,000 a year, but it's gone up pretty steadily. Again, the biggest one is Pacific Opera Victoria, which is the big dark blue thing here.
Mhm.
For the last 5 years, ending November next year, we've had a long-term lease with Pacific Opera Victoria, which provides about 80% actually of our rental income.
Mhm.
That will be renewed hopefully next November, but that's a question mark about the future, what they are going to do.
Mhm.
Beyond that, we have much smaller items like parking spots, which we're charging $130 a month for at the moment. That's been going up by $10 a month. And we have some short-term rentals, which of course are things like weddings, funerals, and other things where we let out part or all of the
Mhm.
church.
Okay. And so it seems like these are our major sources of income, our givings and rentals. Do we have any other sources of income?
Yes, we have what we simply call non-operating income, just to
Okay.
distinguish it from operating income. and I will show you a few slides actually, which sort of will explain what all that means.
Mm.
Okay.
So I see you're showing me a chart that says non-operating income by thousands per year. So what makes up non-operating income?
As you can see from this chart, as usual, there are 5 years, and it's a very varied and unreliable, each of these. One of the larger ones, if you like, on average, is bequests and memorials, which is the dark blue. But obviously, to have a bequest, someone has to die, which is not only sad in itself, but typically that would be a parishioner, which means our givings drop whenever we have a bequest. So that's not something we plan for, of course, nor do we want it to happen, of course.
Absolutely.
This next biggest one was the federal government, actually, and CEWS, as you may know, was Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy.
All
We
right.
got $85,000 roughly over the 2 years of COVID, which helped to offset our payroll. Investment income, it comes in two parts. I think that's the best way to talk about it. We have this 1.3 million portfolio at current value, and we get money out of that in two ways. We get regular dividends and interest, which are currently somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000 per year, which helps to offset our operating deficit. However, every so often we will sell something, and whenever you sell something, you potentially get a realized gain or loss, depending on what you bought it for. And in 2021, we changed brokers, which meant we had to sell all our old portfolio and buy with a new broker. And so we had about $100,000 of unrealized gains in 2021, which is the source of our increase in apportionment or assessment for next year.
Understood. My big takeaway from all of those sections is that some of those non-operating income sources, they're just irregular. They can't really be planned. And so if our operating expenses are regular and can be planned and can be anticipated from month to month and year to year, we shouldn't really be counting on non-operational income to cover those basic expenses.
Correct.
And then, are there any other sources of non-operational income beyond what you just showed?
Yes, I'm going to put up on the screen another chart which covers an important one, which is it's both an income and a cost. It involves all our projects.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I had wondered, because you kept saying that, this is just our operating costs, this is our operating income, but I know there's things that we do that aren't part of our regular operating costs, and I wondered how that got accounted for. This is really like a whole separate account, and so now I'm going to see how this all works. That's great.
Okay, over the last 5 years, we've undertaken 3 very significant major projects. In 2018-19, we had a major upgrade to the church lighting, cost over $107,000 almost. And starting in 2020, we're upgrading the access to the lower hall, which will cost about $100,000, but it is delayed by COVID. I'm sorry, not only by COVID, but it's also delayed because we can't get permits at the moment.
Right.
And the third major project, of course, was the refurbishment of the organ, which started in 2019, was again delayed by COVID, but has recently been completed for about $74,000, including rental costs. Now, that's shown on this chart, but there's another big category in yellow, which is all other projects, and they cover a wide variety of things. You may remember in 2018, we did some work on the Mason Street Cottage. We had the garden security study last year. We had chapel refurbishment back in 2018, the audiovisual upgrade last year, and all of those were under $50,000, plus a lot of smaller little projects. But so that's those are the major projects, and that's the costs of them. So that actually is a cost.
Right. So then, how do we actually then pay for all these separate projects?
That's what I'm just moving on to.
Oh, good.
This is the opposite side of that. This is the grants and pledges or specific donations that we got to cover about 61% of all our project costs, and almost all of our major project costs have been covered in this way. The dark blue one, of course, is the lighting project, which took about 4 years to recover all the cost. This big orange thing in 2020 is the $100,000 grant we got from the federal government for
Right.
improving access to our lower hall. And I think the key thing out of this is that currently both the finance team and the parish council have decided no new projects will be undertaken, major projects that is, without grants obtained and a pledge campaign for the remainder in place.
That sounds really financially prudent. So this is really a separate account, and we're also really going to make sure that any projects are funded, because right now the regular bills, the regular operating costs aren't getting covered. That makes a lot of sense. So what is the bottom line after all of this?
Well, when we put all our operating and non-operating costs together, we end up with what an accountant would call a net cash flow, which
Okay.
basically is the money that flows in and out of our bank.
Mhm.
And that helps to explain why our financial situation today is so urgent.
Mm.
This net cash flow really is our bottom line, as I think some people call it. And this again on the same sort of scale, from plus 300 to minus 400. That's thousands of dollars per year. And this is 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, and this year, 2022. As you can see, the bottom line actually is where the bottom of this chart is, sorry, of this column is. And so in 2018 and 19, our bottom line was essentially that we had almost $200,000 negative. We had to finance from investments. Now in 2020, this improved somewhat, partly, of course, because of this large grant we got from the federal government. But again, in 2021, it was back down to 200, and now this year it's over $300,000.
Wow. Wow. And
A
so,
sobering number.
yeah, this is really, really serious. And so, given these trends, it looks like there's some things that we need to do differently. So, given how our income streams fluctuate, given our current situation, how might we improve our income?
Okay. Briefly going through the charts that we've seen, givings have dropped during COVID, and hopefully they're going to start to rise again. We have a current stewardship campaign that is really about increasing total giving, including giving that we will pay for operating expenses. As I mentioned before, sadly, bequests are usually followed by a reduction in total givings because we've lost a parishioner. So that's not something we look to improve our income. Now, we must explore potential new sources of givings, as in fact we did with Canada Helps when COVID struck. We sort of encouraged people to use that. Now, rentals, I mentioned before, the POV lease is up for renewal next November 23. That will be a critical issue. If they renew it and what the terms are and so on. Parking slot revenue, of course, declined during COVID because people weren't using their offices now, and we must begin to build that up again and maximize that income.
Right.
Other rental income, of course, also dipped thanks to COVID, but we must market that well in the future.
Okay.
Now, as we refurbish the lower hall, which is that smaller project that's going on right now, but and also, of course, including access, what we have to think about is, can that bring in more income? And our Transforming Futures team, in their preliminary report, their proposals 1 to 5, suggests that we explore all those sort of options as to whether they could bring in some potential income. And as they suggest, we need to review this potential urgently.
And so, what I see as some key takeaway points from everything that you've taught me today, in order to balance our budget, we simply need to bring in more income. But that's really going to require members of the congregation to think hard about what they can do and or what they're willing to see happen. That could include thinking about how they as individuals might give more, and that's great. They might think about giving the same amount they're currently giving, but doing it in ways that will involve lower fees paid by the church. It might mean giving more or the same amount, but thinking about where their giving is going, realizing that we really are falling short in terms of operating expenses, and if the operating expenses aren't covered, then all the other good things that we do can't get done. And also that we really need to think hard as a congregation about things we're willing to do to bring in income, what kinds of things we might be willing to, for example, rent out the property to do. Yes, we would get income from a rental. What kinds of things are we comfortable with? Are we interested in having somebody help us figure out what the space could be used for and maximize the income that we would get from various kinds of space that we have? These are big decisions. And so I think what you've done, David, is you've really given a lot of information. You've given information about income, you've given information about expenses, you've given information about the overall financial situation. And all of this is really going to lead into what will be then our fourth of the short videos, the last one in the official series, which is really going to be an overview of how people in the congregation can weigh in on decisions about next year's budget, how they can be involved in financial planning. And so I'm really hoping that everybody's going to watch that next video, the final of the 4 short videos, to learn all about the overall budgeting process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erin.